Welcome, my friends, to the darkest corner. Today we have two paranormal natural disasters. Please enjoy.
The earth had been restless for weeks, not the usual tremors that rattled the old mining town of Blackwood occasionally, but a deep, unsettling vibration that hummed beneath your feet even when you stood still. The animals were agitated, the well water tasted metallic, and a strange, low moan seemed to emanate from the abandoned mines that scarred the mountainside. Then it began, not with a sharp jolt, but with a slow, sickening lurch, like a giant beast stirring in its sleep. The ground rolled and bucked, not just horizontally, but vertically, throwing people off their feet as if they were rag dolls. But this wasn't just an earthquake. This felt different. Old Mrs. Gable, who'd lived through her share of shakers in her 80 years, swore she saw faces in the cracks that spiderwebbed across her living room wall, fleeting, anguished expressions that vanished as quickly as they appeared. Little Timmy Henderson claimed his toys started floating in the air during the strongest tremors, spinning slowly as if caught in an invisible current. Sheriff Brody, a different Sheriff Brody, as Blackwood was a town with a long history and similar names, a pragmatic man who relied on seismographs and geological surveys, found his instruments going haywire. The readings were erratic, defying any known seismic patterns. The epicenter seemed to shift constantly, and the energy released felt disproportionate to the surface damage. As the paranormal earthquake continued, strange phenomena multiplied. Whispers, too faint to understand, seemed to rise from the fissures in the ground. Shadows stretched and contorted into impossible shapes. People reported seeing translucent figures moving through the dust and debris, their forms flickering like heat haze. Sarah Jenkins, a volunteer at the town's historical society, remembered an old legend. Blackwood, it was said, was built upon a site sacred to a long-lost indigenous tribe, a place where the veil between worlds was thin. When the mines were dug, disturbing the ancient ground, the spirits had grown restless. Could this earthquake be their awakening, a violent upheaval from the other side? The most unsettling phenomenon was the feeling of being watched. People felt unseen eyes upon them, a cold, sorrowful presence that seemed to emanate from the very ground beneath their feet. Some even claimed to hear their names whispered on the windless air. The paranormal earthquake reached its peak as the old Blackwood mine, sealed off for decades after a tragic collapse, began to groan and shudder. A beam of eerie green light pulsed from its main entrance, and the moaning sound intensified, becoming a chorus of despairing voices. Sheriff Brody, armed with flashlights and a growing sense of the unbelievable, led a group of townsfolk towards the mine. As they approached, they saw figures emerging from the green light, shadowy silhouettes that seemed to drift rather than walk, their forms radiating a palpable sense of loss and anguish. Sarah, clutching a collection of tribal folklore, recognized symbols etched on the rock face near the mine entrance, symbols meant to appease the spirits of the earth. She realized the mining operations had not only disturbed the ground, but had also desecrated a sacred site, angering the entities bound to it. Following the guidance in her books, Sarah began to chant in the ancient language, her voice trembling but clear. As the unfamiliar syllables filled the air, the green light from the mine flickered. The shadowy figures paused, their sorrowful moans softening. The ground beneath their feet began to still, the violent shaking subsiding into a gentle tremor. The whispers faded, and the feeling of being watched lessened. The eerie green light retracted back into the mine, and the moaning voices grew silent. Slowly, the paranormal earthquake subsided completely. Blackwood was scarred, buildings lay in ruins, but the intangible terror had lifted. The townsfolk, shaken but alive, gathered near the old mine. Sarah explained the legend and the importance of respecting the land's history. The paranormal earthquake, she believed, was a manifestation of the disturbed spirits, their sorrow and anger shaking the very foundations of their world. Her chanting, a form of ancient apology and appeasement, had offered them a measure of peace. Blackwood began to rebuild, but with a newfound respect for the land and its hidden history. They held a ceremony near the old mine, honoring the lost tribe and the spirits that dwelled beneath. The earth remained still, the unsettling vibrations gone. The paranormal earthquake had been a terrifying reminder that some forces lie beyond the understanding of science, rooted in the forgotten stories and the restless souls of the past. The sky had been a bruised plum color all afternoon, a sickly hue that mirrored the unease settling in the small town of Havenwood. Old Man Hemlock, perched on his porch swing, swore the air tasted of ozone and something else, something ancient and cold. The wind picked up, not with the familiar rush of a coming storm, but with a sighing, almost mournful sound. Then it appeared on the horizon, not as a dark, churning funnel of clouds, but as a swirling vortex of shadows. It wasn't opaque. You could see through it, the distant trees and fields distorted as if viewed through heat haze, but the shadows within writhed and pulsed with an unnatural life. There was no roar, no deafening thunder, only that chilling sigh that seemed to seep into your bones. Sheriff Brody, a man who'd seen his share of bad weather in his 50 years, felt a prickle of genuine fear. This wasn't weather. This was wrong. His radio crackled with frantic reports. Lights flickering, pets howling uncontrollably, people claiming to see figures moving within the shadowy funnel. The paranormal tornado touched down on the outskirts of town, not with a destructive impact, but with a chilling caress. Where it passed, the air grew frigid. Flowers wilted instantly, turning brittle and black. A flock of birds caught in its path didn't scatter. They simply vanished. Young Emily Carter, walking home from school, found herself frozen in place as the swirling shadows enveloped her street. She could see shapes within the vortex, fleeting glimpses of what looked like faces, contorted in silent screams and grasping shadowy hands. A whisper, not of wind, but of countless voices murmuring in a language she didn't understand, yet felt deep in her soul, brushed against her ears. Panic seized the town. People barricaded their doors, not against wind and debris, but against something far more insidious. The tornado moved with an unnerving intelligence, seeming to drift towards areas with strong emotional resonance. The old cemetery where generations of Havenwood residents lay buried became its focal point. As the shadowy vortex hovered over the gravestones, the ground beneath began to tremble. Not the violent shaking of an earthquake, but a subtle vibration, like a giant heart beating beneath the soil. Eerie lights flickered amongst the headstones, and the mournful sigh intensified, carrying with it fragmented cries and whispers of forgotten sorrows. Sheriff Brody, armed with nothing but his duty and a growing sense of dread, drove toward the cemetery. He saw figures emerging from the swirling shadows, translucent forms that resembled the town's long-deceased residents. They moved with a slow, sorrowful grace, their spectral eyes fixed on the living. Old Man Hemlock, despite his frail frame, hobbled toward the edge of town, clutching a worn leather-bound book. He'd always been the town's eccentric, the keeper of forgotten lore. He believed the tornado wasn't a natural phenomenon, but a manifestation of collective grief, a swirling vortex of unresolved sorrow that had accumulated over Havenwood's long history. The book contained ancient rituals, meant to soothe restless spirits. As the spectral figures began to drift toward the homes, their touch leaving a trail of icy despair, Old Man Hemlock began to chant in a low, resonant voice. The words were in a language no one recognized, yet they seemed to vibrate in the air, countering the tornado's mournful sigh. The effect was subtle at first. The spectral figures hesitated, their translucent forms flickering. The shadowy vortex seemed to pulse erratically. Emily, still frozen on her street, felt a sliver of warmth break through the chilling air. Sheriff Brody reached the cemetery and watched in disbelief as the spectral figures recoiled from Hemlock's chanting. The old man's voice grew stronger, the ancient words weaving a tapestry of peace and release. The eerie lights amongst the gravestones began to dim. Slowly, agonizingly, the paranormal tornado began to dissipate. The swirling shadows thinned, the mournful sigh faded, and the spectral figures dissolved back into the ether. By dawn, only the bruised plum sky remained, a lingering reminder of the night's terror. Havenwood was shaken, forever changed. They had faced a force beyond the realm of nature, a tornado born of sorrow and memory. Old Man Hemlock, weakened but resolute, explained that the town's long-forgotten stories, the unacknowledged grief of generations, had coalesced into this spectral storm. The chanting, he said, was a way of finally acknowledging that pain, allowing the spirits to find peace. The townspeople of Havenwood began to share their stories, their losses, their unspoken sorrows. They held a town-wide vigil in the cemetery, not in fear, but in remembrance. And as they spoke, a gentle breeze stirred the leaves, a sigh no longer mournful, but soft and releasing. The paranormal tornado was gone,